Welcome, gentle listener, I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the factions, forces, and faces of the Warhammer 40k universe, the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. Now, as usual, I shall be providing a little tale to whet the appetite, then progress to the details of the lore, before summing up with my thoughts on the information presented. And I know this particular topic would not only shock, but deeply disquiet some of the more ardent fans of the Imperium. Yet I feel I must show what the Imperium is and what it does, both light and dark, if we are to remain true to the core tenets of the setting. For betrayal and revenge are as much a part of the grim darkness as the bolter or even the marine. And a dark page is this indeed. The ultimate expression of finding out after messing about. But before we do this, I will ask your indulgence just this once more, as we have an exceptionally brief word from the sponsors of this video. The Nexus Wars have begun. Welcome to the strategy mobile game Nexus Wars. If you like science fiction games like me, then you should definitely try it. The Astra came out of nowhere and assailed the entire universe. Now you must stop them. In this game, you can find every element you love here. The boundless universe, giant spacecraft, and huge monsters. There are 4 distinctive factions in the universe: humans, Thea, Izan, and Aoku. The game provides various battle modes. You can enjoy fighting with bosses in PvE mode, or fight against other players to show who is the best strategist. But what makes this game great is the design of the characters. You will be able to summon different characters to strengthen your team. Look at Heinroy, his arsenal is amazing, and I love the design. He's a must-include warrior for your team, and my favourite lady, Sintra. She looks elegant, but she's definitely a cold-blooded killer. So download Nexus Wars now from this QR code or the link in the description for free. The instant you start this adventure, you will be drawn into a world of action and intrigue, while you act as the savior of humanity, the bane of the Astra, and protector of the people. You will progress down a story that is second to none. One more thing you shouldn't miss: use my exclusive gift code, NW Hero Pack, and gain over $100 worth of rewards, limited to 100 codes, so first come, first served. Scan the QR code now, or download it from the link in the description. Can you win the Nexus Wars? Thank you for your patience. I always do a few adverts around summer, as things are slow then. Alas, even a servo skull must keep the lights on and satisfy those bills. But rest assured, they will not be an ever-present fixture. Now, let us proceed to the story. Betrayed. It's as easy as 1, 2, 3. That simple, that obvious. And I, an angel of death, and Astartes, a space marine. I want to curse the heavens for the perfidy of the pathetic. I want to howl my anger into the skies, to decry the injustice. I want to weep for the future, if only I were capable. A thing besmirched by this present state of affairs. For we, the greatest warriors the human race has ever known, we, the most orderly and disciplined sons of the 7th Primarch, we, his celestial lions, are being wiped out. It is not the Xenos, nor the Neverborn, nor the traitors who seal our fate. It is our own who are doing this, our supposed allies, our own species. They may not be pulling the triggers of shooters, nor assailing us directly with weapons in hand, but we are undone, and it is the invisible hand that strikes us down. And it's all so obvious. They respect us so little. 1, 2, 3. We arrayed for war, deploying all that remained of our number, a full half of the chapter still. Usually enough to quell rebellions system-wide, usually enough to win any battle. And the war leaders, they brought every asset we had left. Every last rhino, predator, land raider, whirlwind and dreadnought. They brought it all. This was to be a battle not just for the Mannheim Gap, but for the very existence of our chapter. We gambled it all, everything we had, in this last desperate throw of the dice. Or that is how most below Pride leader felt. What they knew, of course. I knew otherwise. I was one of the rare non-rankers who did. We had been betrayed. In a million different negative turns of circumstance, Lady Lark had turned her head from us. Or so they said. Yet, this was not the truth. Not really. We are not the Lamenters. We were not the cursed albino Vatborn. The universe despised us no more or less than any who fought under the banners of the God Emperor. As I said, it was as obvious as 1, 2, 3. The Mannheim Gap. The war at Armageddon. The orcs had returned. In numbers and strength that had not been seen in thousands of years, if ever before. Their fleets blotted out the stars. Their armies of rabble moved in such hordes that it was as if the ground itself had risen and marched towards us. Carpets of green, howling madness marching. They struck near everywhere. Yet, we contended with them mightily, both we Celestial Lions and the others present. The Steel Legion fought them to a standstill time and again. The Salamanders, Blood Angels, and our brethren, the Black Templars, all had sown such destruction on the Greenskins that their annals, their rolls of honour, would be over-burgeoning. Yet it was never enough to merely weather the Orc storm. For if one does not root them out and annihilate them all, then their landing sites, their nests, begin to blurt out weapons of mind-twisting power, their strange defiance of reality a horror if left untended. The Orcs had been pushed back time and again, yet the Mannheim Gap, it was still in their hands. And from it, they were preparing to send out entire columns of Orc Gargants, their colossal equivalents of the Quaestorist Knights. Orbital Recon had identified scores of the beasts about to be brought online. So we, the Celestial Lions, were tasked to take the Orc encampment, to smash and slaughter everything there. 1, 2, 3. Finally, we were prepared, all in position. The mark was given, and instantly all hell broke loose. We churned through the mud and dust, our column thrusting into the depths of their camp. Yet they charged out of buildings, erupted from the woods and brush above the valley. Their response was so swift, it was impossible for it to be hidden. They knew. They were ready for us. 1. They came out and met us head on. Yet, were we not Astartes? Were we not the most holy Celestial Lions? We tore through them. We brought righteous slaughter to the Greenskins. We did. Until the mountains around us moved. The Gargants. They were not being constructed. They were not being brought online. They were ready. And at point-blank range, they unleashed hell on us. The kind of firepower that brought down hive walls, the kind of ordnance that topples titans, the kind of horror that saw entire millennia of experience deleted in the flash of an eye. I witnessed as blasts erupted from the behemoth beings and slashed through our lines. Lakes of plasmatic fire dropped onto our tanks, melting them and all who attempted to escape their fate, merely wallowing in the burning flames. Entire trenches of ground tens of feet wide torn apart by the orc cannons. Squads disappeared in a heartbeat. Formations were gone in mere moments. 2. Yet, despite all the turmoil and furore, the confusion of the clash, I noticed it. Few did at first, but soon the knowing swept down the lines. I watched as my war leader fell forward, his head smoking. When we turned him, his head had but the one hole in it. Then, moments later, my pride leader also fell backwards, his head a mess of burning metal and smoke also. I dove for cover, but I looked at him as I did so. There, in the center of his helm, the burn hole that only a high-precision energy weapon could produce. And our leadership was shot out from under us. Orc fire, some said. But what orc uses a sniper rifle, let alone a laser or energy-powered one? No. 3. This was number 3. Somewhere out there, someone was sniping out our officers, making sure our chain of command broke down. The confusion would take hold of our entire formation, and it was not the orcs. It could not be. This was number 3. They had brought us here, to the Mannheim Gap, to die. Here was not our operation, our task, or our objective. Here was our tomb, and we walked into it. And less than 3 score of us would walk out again. Now comes the hour of the revelation of dark deeds. For today, we shall be discussing those stalwarts who stood against tyranny, those marines who would not let sleeping dogs lie, the men who would not be silenced in the face of injustice. We speak of the chapter of Space Marines known as the Celestial Lions. A comparatively young chapter, they were brought into existence in the founding of the 38th millennia. Effective, efficient, and brave, their only possible detraction could be identified as that which was so ironic: pride. As sons of Rogal Dorn, the Primarch of the 7th Legion, the Imperial Fists, they had that icy control that could manifest as unchanging brittleness. The perfect Marines in many regards, yet their confidence and self-assured fanatical devotion to their cause, and of course, how they performed it. A common Achilles heel writ large on their very mental and physical makeup. From the same seed as the Black Templars and Crimson Fists, the Celestial Lions also held this independent streak, but also the unfaltering diligence that meant that they could never witness infamy and let it go unremarked and unresisted. But first, I feel it best I make a few clarifications before we proceed. We save more time and enjoy the ride better if we are all at the same speed. Separate, but not above. The autonomy of the Adeptus Astartes. Once, the Marines and their Primarch fathers were the unquestionable masters of most of the armed forces under the Imperium's banners. For who would gainsay a son of the Emperor? His immortal sons, the lords of the 20 legions. Yet when a full half of the legions turned traitor and followed Horus into his benighted heresy, the face of the galaxy was changed forever, the bright future destroyed. The traitor legions fought their way to the very gates of the Imperial Palace on Terra, but at the last they failed and were thrown back. Then the Loyalists hunted them into the Eye of Terror. When all was done, the enemy seeming to be chased from existence, The Primarch Rubute Gilliman scrutinized the events, their causes, how they could be prevented from ever happening again. He broke up all of the wings of the army, the navy, and even the legions. Never again would the forces of the Imperium be held under the sway of a handful of men alone. Only then could they prevent another heresy. For instead of seducing but a few generals or admirals, for the forces of chaos to gain traction and control, they would have to convert thousands of personnel at every level across many departments and sub-factions. The Space Marine legions were broken into chapters of no more than 1,000 fighting men, and the equipment to prosecute independent operations. In a word, wars. The Space Marines were the only force to retain their own transport. The battle barges, strike cruisers, and their escorts are under the direct authority of the ranking Marines. The Astartes did not take control of a battlefield or campaign often, though most Guard or Militarum generals of any worth would cede to their experience and expertise. Yet, the Marines, in turn, could not be directed or ordered either. They could agree to be involved in a unified operation, linking their command network with that of the Titans, Knights, Guard, Armor, Infantry, Sororitas, or Mechanicus forces. But they could still leave at any time. It is not for the mortal to question the priorities or activities of the genetically enhanced warriors of the Emperor. For their mandate comes from the Golden Throne, and he who sits on it. Yet, as the old saying goes, there is always a price. The Astartes were separate, but not above. The trade-off for their autonomy was their compliance and understanding of their position. The Marines would defend the Imperium, and none but the High Lords could question their methods. But in return, the Marines would make no comment on how that realm was run, and nor could they dictate their own numbers. This was decided by the High Lords, where tithed gene seed stocks could be expended, and new Forge World Manufactorum lines commissioned for the creation and support of new foundings of Space Marine chapters. And in over 10,000 years of the Imperium, only few are the times this pact has been broken, and only in great need, where the intervention of the Astartes saved the entire Imperium from dire mismanagement. Separate and above, the power of the Inquisition. There are three main orders of the Inquisition, though there are a plethora of smaller groups and sects also. But these are the Ordo Malleus, who hunt and destroy the taint of the unclean demons wherever they find it. The Ordo Xenos, who hunt and destroy the alien and all that are in league with them. And the Ordo Hereticus, who hunt and destroy the traitor, the heretic, the witch. And their mandate also comes from the Emperor himself. Yet they are substantially different in one facet. They are above all. Though there are limits to most authority, the only controls placed on an Inquisitor is their gall, confidence, or the influence and threat of other Inquisitors to hold them at bay. Theirs is the duty to root out the enemies within the gates, and to eradicate them with extreme prejudice. It is a fool of an Inquisitor who makes too high a demand of a chapter master. But, in the end, if the case were to go to arbitration, then it is inevitable that the Inquisitor's authority outranks that of the Marines. The two organizations can work together formidably, as has been attested countless times. The Grey Knights, although very special indeed, are still Marines, and they work with the Ordo Malleus almost perfectly. The Death Watch are married to the efforts of the Ordo Xenos, and the Black Templars are often called to assist the Ordo Hereticus. Yet, as a whole, the Inquisition deem that they have the greater authority, and again, none but the High Lords of Terra would refute this. Where the chapters are masters of war, they are above, so they are separate. The Ordos of the Inquisition have spies and operatives inside or from every single organization. They are everyone and no one. They are entire networks, or they are roaming bands of specialists orbiting a lone figure. They are a massive organization with tentacles in every branch of every planet, but they are also the local conclave, with all its regional tunnel vision and pride. They are the one petty snot, whose bruised ego can lead to the end of worlds. Yet they are also the bulwark that gathers the data by which wars are won. So, when the Astartes and the Ordos do not see eye to eye, things get complicated. Clarifications are now over. On to the inciting incident. On to the Karsar Massacre. Evil can inveigle itself into the deepest recesses of any society, even those of the most pious planets in the Imperium, and when the rot has a hold, it spreads quickly. And so it was deemed to be on the shrine world of Karsar, an entire planet set aside to cathedrals, palaces, abbeys, endless graves, and holy groves. Shrine worlds were the spiritual bastilles of the faith. They should have been immune to chaos corruption. Yet, on the world of Karsar, it was discovered that the very priestly classes were the wellspring of the taint. The very preachers who should have been extolling the God Emperor of mankind, instead were filthy heretics, worshippers of the dark powers. Inquisitor Apollyon discovered the corruption and called out to the local chapter of Space Marines for support. And this chapter was the Celestial Lions. They heard the Inquisitor, and then strategically and systematically annihilated all resistance on Karsar. Every planetary defense unit or Astra Militarum Guard formation that had gone over to these heretical beliefs were smashed. In under a month, the entire planet was subjugated. As the infestation had been in the higher echelons of society, the Lions took a bit off the top, so to say. So when the rebellion was quelled and the forces all leaving, the Celestial Lions were more than a little surprised at what happened next. As the Marines prepared to jump away, they witnessed the naval ships under the Inquisition opening fire on every populated region of Karsar. The planet would not be rendered uninhabitable for all time, but this was a lesser exterminatus order. The cities were bombed into oblivion, the towns evaporated by lance fire, the entire world left barren of sentient life. The Celestial Lions, after fighting so hard for this world, turned and ordered the ships to cease their bombardment. Inquisitor Apollyon thanked the Celestial Lions for their service, yet the firing continued until nothing was left. Here is where the difficulties for the Celestial Lions began, for they could not be silent. They could not just walk away. The chapter master of the Lions sent an embassage to Terra itself, requesting an audience with the High Lords. A formal complaint against the Inquisition was their task. It did not go to plan. The ship appeared in the Sol system, but all hands on board were lost. Not unusual, but not common. Regardless, the chapter master sent missives to every local commander, officer, planetary governor, every outpost, everyone and anyone who would accept their hails, and they decried the callous acts of the Inquisition, warning all of their perfidy, their treachery. They held nothing back, and they made enemies. Enemies amid the Ordo Hereticus. And thus, the die was cast. And now, as usual, for the very basics, let us lean on existing wisdom. To quote, the Third War for Armageddon. In year 998, Millennium 41, the Third War for Armageddon began. This was a massive conflict between the Imperium of Man and the largest orc war raised in millennia, led by the green-skinned warlord Ghazghul Mag Uruk Thraka. The war was fought on the hive world of Armageddon, where Ghazghkull Thraka had launched his first attempt to seize a planet, exactly 57 Terran years before. The conflict eventually drew in portions of more than 25 Space Marine chapters, dozens of Astra Militarum regiments, and several Titan legions. The Celestial Alliance had brought 983 warriors to this world. Their entire chapter had landed on Armageddon, but for the most remote, uninitiated training forces still spread across the segmentum. By the time they stood in defense of the Mannheim Gap, they had been on the surface for 3 solar months and 16 days, defending High Vulcanus on the west coast of the subcontinent of Armageddon Prime. In that span of time, all of which was spent bolter to blade in the city's burning streets, they suffered casualties far, far in advance of any other chapter. Everywhere they fought, the enemy struck back in overwhelming numbers. Countless times they were deployed to reinforce elements of the Imperial Guard, but they were already long dead by the time the Lions arrived, leaving the Space Marine deep in enemy territory without an easy path for withdrawal. On at least 15 catalogued occasions, they were ordered to advance on specific critical objectives, only to find themselves alone without the planned support forces or the promised reinforcements. As casualties mounted, ambushes were common, even on routine patrols through pacified territory. The Lions were assigned to hold crucial districts and sectors, and accordingly moved in force to cover all necessary ground. Yet they found their patrols being hit harder than any orbital intelligence had predicted possible. The enemy would appear in numbers undreamed of, rising from ambushes and sectors that were recorded as being cleansed beforehand. The Lions were granted orbital picts and Auspex Sky readouts from Hive Command, only to find their intelligence scarcely matched the embattled realities of their deployment zones. Time and again, the Lions jumped into the fire. They had no choice, for the chapter would not allow the city to fall, and they could not allow the enemy to live. It did not take long for them to rely first and foremost on their own scanners and scouts, but their equipment suffered unexpected deterioration and frequent jamming. The scouts often fell silent while out in the city alone. Sometimes the Lions would find their scouts' bodies, but usually they were lost. Picked feeds from their vessels in orbit were distorted from the void war playing out above, but those rare wrecked visual clues were the most reliable intelligence they could muster. The Lions swore by them, thanking the Thrall captains of their warships for any and all devoted efforts. But these also grew more infrequent as their fleet was massacred in the sky. The Lions had fought well. No other Space Marine chapter would cast aspersions on their fighting character. Their difficult straits had arisen from apparent ill fortune. Orders given but never received, or too slowly answered. There were many reports of Vox interference, and orders never reaching their warship's captains. Much of it reeked of enemy guile. The Lions' battle barge, Serenkai, was boarded and overwhelmed when it pulled free of the Black Templar spearhead, failing to heed orders to maintain formation. The cruiser, Lavi, took 4 solar hours to die from structural hemorrhage when it collided with the wounded Flesh Tearer's flagship Victus. The Nubic had destroyed itself when it was boarded, choosing sacrifice over capture. Only 3 vessels from the Lions' fleet remained during the latter part of the conflict, and those who might have borne closer witness to what had actually happened were in their graves. It was difficult to know which of these events were born of sabotage or treachery rather than honest battle. If the Inquisition had moved against the Lions, it was doing so with a tenacity and subtlety rarely seen amongst its agents. Less than a solar month into the campaign, rearming runs from orbit began to grow as rare as reliable intelligence. Celestial Lions dropships were destroyed high in the atmosphere on 2 occasions, and on another, Vulcanus' own wall guns malfunctioned and destroyed an incoming shipment, blowing 7 loaded Thunderhawk gunships out of the sky. End quote. The lines of the battle across the planet were shifting. War raged from one end to the other, and threats seemed to appear out of nowhere. The Orcs were far better led than usual. They were deploying tactics other than the standard charge, and it made them difficult to deal with indeed. The orders from High Command were brief and pointed, and the decision had been made. There was an incredibly important section of the Orc force gathered on Armageddon, a pit of creation and repair, the Mannheim Gap. A valley where the Orcs had set up a huge ramshackle production yard, one that it was reported to be the centre for Gargant production. Gargants, the huge Titan and Knight-sized Orc war machines that brought Terra to the battlefield. And, as stated in the story at the beginning of this video, the predictable happened. For the Orcs were indeed prepared. Someone had tipped them off. When what remained of the Celestial Lions entered the gap, they were set upon immediately. The Orcs bounded to their defences and punished the Lions as they came on. Then the truth was revealed, as the Orc Gargants powered up and began to unleash fire into the Marines. They were fully operational when the Marines arrived. The slaughter was great, but it was the third sign that confirmed matters. For the officers of the Celestial Lions were being picked off in quick succession, sniped out at extreme range by what seemed to be laser-based weapons, and neither sniping nor lasers were the calling card of the Orcs. Someone was actively assisting the Greenskins, destroying the Celestial Lions' leadership, and it was someone human. The battle became a slaughter on both sides. The Orcs can always sustain casualties, however, but on that day, on that field, thousands of accumulated combat experience and expertise was sent to hell. The Celestial Lions were brought down to less than 70 of their number. They were all but wiped out, and shame beyond shame, they were forced to retreat from the gap. They were forced to retreat in the face of the enemy. To quote, "It took the Lions 4 solar hours to fight free. They carved their way back the way they came, abandoning a sea of dead tanks, slain battle brothers, and butchered green enemy bodies. The gene seed of half the chapter lay rotting at the bottom of that canyon, unharvested by the Lions' life-binders and defiled by the thousands of foes they left behind. The aliens had fled from the field, and the most valiant battle the Celestial Lions ever fought was that retreat. Never had they faced such odds, and the last of them cut their way free, pulling their brothers from the storm of blades and fell back to their fortresses with the enemy at their heels. The Xenos flooded their forward base before most of their survivors had arrived, and the Celestial Lions had to fight just to escape their falling fortress. Even then, for every gunship that raced free, another 2 were shot down in flames. The survivors of the Celestial Lions returned to High Vulcanus. Only 3 officers were left at dusk of that day. 3 officers above the rank of Pride Leader. Death Speaker Jolkara, who called Recruciarch Grimaldus of the Black Templar's brother. War Leader Vakembi, the last surviving captain of the chapter, and Lifebinder K. Took, the Lion's only living apothecary. The chapter's future rested on his skills. But the final insult was yet to play out. The last gasp in this drama of shame and treachery occurred late that same terrible evening. The Lion's territory inside the city was a cold foundry, nearly lightless, with a perimeter of rockcrete patrolled by their remaining warriors. Lifebinder K. Took did not survive the first night after their terrible defeat. The Lions found him at dawn, slouched against their last land raider, shot through the eye lenses. The gene seed he had carried was gone, and he would harvest no more. The depths of the Celestial Lions' plight on Armageddon was dire indeed. They had lost their fleet, their armory, their officers, and almost all hope of rebuilding their chapter. They couldn't even cling to pride after the shame of defeat. All that remained to them was the truth. The Lions vowed to survive long enough to speak it. The Imperium needed to know what happened to them on Armageddon, where they had been betrayed by others who claimed to serve the Emperor. End quote. Alas, the situation was dire indeed. For the pride of the Celestial Lions meant that they could not leave the planet. They could not withdraw from the war and return to their homeworld. they had not taken the Mannheim Gap. Honor was all to the Space Marines, something that will never change. Hence, they were doomed to return to that slaughter ground, to die. But to die honorably. The next phases of the events I wish to cover only briefly, for this is not an exhaustive entry on the Celestial Lions, merely an introduction. And some elements I wish to retain for a planned video on the war at Armageddon, and of course, about Remleiz himself. So I will only give an overview now. The next phase was simple. The Celestial Lions could not withdraw from the campaign, but they did reach out to their kin. For the Black Templars were present on Armageddon in strength, and they were led by Helbrecht himself, the High Marshal of the entire chapter. Chapter indeed. As fellow sons of Rogal, the Celestial Lions reached out to their brethren, reporting on what had happened. Unable to trust Vox or other forms of communication, the Lion's message was sent out on a single transport to the nearest hive, and it made it into the hands of Reclusiarch Grimaldus. The legendary chaplain then arranged for a collection of forces to support the Celestial Lions in their return to the Mannheim Gap. There he sent Armageddon's Steel Legion in strength, and he joined the attack personally. The Lions were able to take the Mannheim Gap, but only with the support of these allies. The slaughter again was exceptional. The Steel Legion paid in blood, but the deed was done, and the Lions had satisfied honor. Despite the assistance from their kin and the Steel Legion, the Lions had retaken the Mannheim Gap. They could stand down with honor intact. And so, they were ordered by Helbrecht of the Black Templars to return to their home world of Elysium 9, to begin the decades or even centuries-long process of rebuilding their chapter to fighting strength. Yet, even after all of this, the humbling of this entire chapter merely to prove a point, it seemed that the hammer did not stop. The Celestial Lions had recovered their strength, but just around the time Cadia fell and the Great Rift opened across the galaxy, the Lions were forced to defend their world from a chaos infestation, but it could not be stopped. The Lions were subsequently forced off their world, taking as much of the population with them as possible. Alas, this is still not the end. For the fleets that sent out Primaris reinforcements never reached the Celestial Lions. They did not gain these new Marines, did not gain new equipment, did not even get the technology to do so. The Lions were desperate and attempted to move to join the Emperor's Spears, to squat on the Spears' homeworld with what remained of their chapter and the people of Elysium 9. Yet, even now, the Inquisition would not relent. The human assassins struck down the chapter master of the Celestial Lions while in their meeting with the Spears. The Spears did give the Primaris technology to their allies, the Lions, so there was that at least. Yet the fate of the Celestial Lions remains unknown. This one event, this terrible waste of life, resources and weaponry, all due to the pettiness of a faction within the Inquisition, an entire chapter of Space Marines broken, sacrificed, and destroyed, merely for presuming to speak out against the Ordo Hereticus. Yet one might question, what exactly will happen when either of the sons of the Emperor hear of this travesty? The Inquisition has been a terrible force in the Imperium, one that most think too callous, too cruel. Yet they know if they fail in their duties, the entire Imperium is doomed. I have been known to attempt to defend the position of the Inquisition, for many of them are cruel warriors indeed. Yet, in most situations, they have no choice. But I felt it necessary to qualify this one. The institutions of the Imperium have been permitted to grow into monoliths that are consumed with corruption. The rot is not that of chaos, but of fanaticism, righteousness, and ignorance. For there are none so dangerous as a crusader who thinks that God is on their side. The other organizations of the Imperium may jostle with the delegates from the Inquisition and the High Lords of Terra, but few there are who would attempt to stop them directly. It only takes an outstretched finger and the claim of heresy for most to be neutralized. Yet, now that Robute Gilliman and Lionel Johnson have returned, no accusation can tarnish their honor. No threat can ever be leveled at them. What exactly will happen when the sons of the Emperor, his Primarchs, find out the level of the rot? Will they simply see this as a price for the protection of the Inquisition? Or will they sweep house and draw the eye teeth from the Ordos and their operatives? It will be exciting to find out. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.